In the early centuries of medieval England, survival was not a matter of comfort or choice. It was a continuous struggle against nature, hunger, disease, and uncertainty. Life during what is often referred to as the dark medieval period was shaped by fragile food supplies, unpredictable weather, and a rigid social structure that left little room for escape. For the vast majority of people, peasants living in scattered villages, each day began with the same question: how to endure until the next. Dawn arrived slowly over thatched rooftops and muddy fields, often through thick mist or biting cold. Homes were simple wooden structures filled with smoke from open hearths, where the fire was both a source of life and a constant risk. There were no chimneys in many early periods, so smoke lingered inside, stinging eyes and clinging to clothing. Families slept close together, sharing warmth, often alongside livestock brought indoors during winter. The smell of animals, smoke, and damp straw defined the enclosed world of survival. Food was the central concern of existence. Most families relied on small plots of land, growing barley, oats, and vegetables like onions, leeks, and beans. Harvest success determined whether winter would bring life or starvation. Grain was carefully stored in clay jars or wooden bins, guarded like treasure. Bread was coarse, often dark and heavy, made from grains mixed with husks or whatever filler could stretch supplies further. Meat was rare for common villagers, usually limited to occasional pig slaughter or small game caught in forests when permitted. The rhythm of survival was dictated by seasons. Spring brought cautious hope as fields were ploughed with wooden ploughs pulled by oxen. Summer was the hardest season physically, as long hours of labour under the sun were needed to secure the harvest. Every able hand worked the land, men, women, and children alike. Even the youngest were tasked with gathering herbs, watching animals, or helping with basic chores. Idleness was a luxury that did not exist. Autumn was the most critical time. Harvest determined everything. Entire villages came together to cut grain, bind sheaves, and store food before the cold arrived. Failure meant starvation during winter months, when roads became impassable and hunting became nearly impossible. The anxiety of winter loomed even during harvest celebrations, as everyone knew that one poor season could destroy an entire community. Winter in medieval England was not simply cold, it was a force of survival pressure. Homes were poorly insulated, and firewood was scarce. Forests were often controlled by local lords, meaning peasants could not freely collect wood without permission. This made fuel as valuable as food. Families rationed fire carefully, often allowing it to burn low overnight, risking freezing temperatures inside their homes. Clothing offered limited protection. Wool was the primary material, rough and heavy, worn in layers. Wealthier peasants might own a single thick cloak, often passed down through generations. Shoes were simple leather wraps or wooden-soled sandals, quickly worn down by mud and frost. Frostbite was not uncommon, especially among those working outdoors in early mornings or late evenings. Water sources were another challenge. Rivers and wells provided drinking water, but contamination was common. Without knowledge of modern sanitation, illness spread easily. Dysentery, respiratory infections, and fevers were frequent causes of death. Medical understanding was limited, blending herbal remedies with superstition. A village healer or local wise woman might use plants like yarrow or willow bark, but success was never guaranteed. Disease outbreaks could devastate entire communities. When illness struck, there was little separation between the sick and healthy. Homes were too small to isolate individuals, and fear often accompanied sickness. In many cases, survival depended more on natural resistance than any form of treatment. Childhood mortality was especially high, shaping families who often expected loss as part of life. Despite hardship, medieval communities were tightly connected. Survival required cooperation. Villages functioned as interdependent systems where shared labour and mutual support increased the chances of endurance. Bread baking, farming, animal care and building repairs were often communal efforts. Even though social hierarchy existed, day-to-day survival blurred many boundaries between individuals. The manor system defined economic life. Local lords owned land and granted peasants the right to live and farm in exchange for labour, taxes, or portions of harvest. This system ensured control over resources, but also provided structure. While often harsh, it created a predictable framework within which people could plan their survival strategies. Obligations to the lord included working his fields, repairing roads, and providing a share of produce. Religion played a central role in daily life. The church was not only a spiritual centre, but also a community anchor. It provided moral structure, explained suffering through divine purpose, and marked time through festivals and holy days. In a world where survival was uncertain, faith offered psychological endurance. Churches were among the few stone buildings in villages, standing as symbols of stability amid fragile wooden homes. Markets were rare, but vital. On designated days, villagers gathered to trade surplus goods, exchange tools, or acquire salt, cloth, and iron. Salt, in particular, was essential for preserving food through winter. Without refrigeration, preservation determined whether families survived long winters or faced starvation. Dried meat, salted fish, and pickled vegetables were carefully rationed supplies. Children in this world grew up quickly. By the age of 7 or 8, they were already contributing to household survival. Education was limited for most, and literacy was rare outside religious institutions. Instead, knowledge was practical: how to plant crops, tend animals, repair tools, and recognize edible plants in the wild. Survival skills were passed orally from generation to generation. Lords and nobles lived differently, but even they were not immune to hardship. Castles provided protection, yet winters could still be harsh, with cold stone interiors and limited heating. However, compared to peasants, they had access to better food reserves, imported goods, and stronger defences. The gap between social classes was vast, but shared vulnerability to weather and disease remained. Conflict added another layer of instability. Wars between rival lords, invasions, and local skirmishes could disrupt farming cycles and destroy stored food. When armies passed through, villages often suffered loss of supplies and livestock. Survival in such times depended on hiding resources or fleeing temporarily into forests. As night fell, darkness engulfed the landscape early, especially in winter months. Without artificial lighting, life slowed dramatically after sunset. Candles and oil lamps were expensive, so most families relied on firelight alone. Evening hours were spent repairing tools, mending clothing, or simply resting in silence. Exhaustion was constant, and sleep was both necessity and escape. Despite overwhelming hardship, medieval England was not a place devoid of resilience. People adapted continuously. They learned to read environmental signs, predict weather changes, and adjust their behaviour accordingly. Survival was not heroic. It was routine, built on repetition, endurance, and quiet determination. Generations lived and died within the same villages, their lives shaped by cycles of scarcity and brief abundance. Every successful harvest, every warm winter night, every recovered illness was a small victory against a world that demanded constant struggle. Survival in the dark medieval period of England was not defined by comfort or progress, but by persistence. It was the ability to continue despite cold, hunger, and uncertainty. And in that persistence, entire communities endured centuries of hardship, shaping the foundation of what would eventually become modern society.